The Duke's ward broke from her nurse's hand and ran straight into the path of the carriage. Eleanor was already moving. She had not stepped down properly, had not waited for the footman, had not gathered her travelling silk against the drizzle of a Hampshire spring that was not quite rain and not quite mist. She had only seen a small, bright shape detach itself from the row of servants on the gravel and bolt, and her body had decided before her mind. She caught the child mid-stride, one arm under the small ribs, and swung her up and away from the wheel as the team reared and the coachman swore from his box. For a moment, Eleanor stood in the wet gravel with the Duke's small ward in her arms, and her heart against her own ribs like a fist. The child did not cry. She lifted her face from Eleanor's shoulder, looked at her with the calm gravity that very small girls sometimes find when they have just escaped something, and then she put her warm palm against Eleanor's cheek, as though confirming that she was real. "Mama," the child said. Not a question, a statement. Final. Eleanor's breath stopped where it had no business stopping. She had spent 2 years learning not to flinch when a word landed on her like that, and she had been good at it, very good at it, until precisely this moment. Her arms tightened around a body that was not hers. The damp curls under her chin smelled of soap and something faintly green. Hyacinth, perhaps, or a child who had been crawling in a garden bed an hour ago. A man came around the corner of the stable block at a stride that consumed gravel. He was hatless, in a coat the colour of indigo gone almost black with rain, and his shoulders filled the space between the holly hedges, as if the path had been carved for him. His hair was dark and damp and pushed back, and his face, when Eleanor looked up over the top of the child's head, was the face of a man who had heard the carriage rear from somewhere out of sight and was running not toward an accident, but toward a particular small body that had a habit of being where she should not be. He stopped, 6 feet from Eleanor. His eyes went first to the child, ran over her, found her unhurt. Only then did they lift to Eleanor's face. He did not speak. The relief in him was so complete that for a beat he could not. "Your Grace," Eleanor said. She tried to curtsy, found she could not, settled for inclining her head over the child she was still holding. I am the new companion, from the agency, Miss Carrow." "Yes," the Duke said. "I see." His voice was lower than she expected, measured, warm in the way that fires kept burning a long time are warm, not blazing, but steady. He did not move to take the child from her. "She came down to meet the carriage," he said. "She does not like to be told no when she has decided a thing." "She has decided," Eleanor said carefully, "that I am her mamma." The Duke became very still. The drizzle ticked against the holly leaves. A pigeon clattered out of the loft above the stable. Somewhere a maid called for a footman, and somewhere else a horse stamped. And Eleanor stood in the wet gravel with a stranger's child in her arms and a Duke 6 feet away, and watched the largest expression she had ever seen on a man's face try to cross his, and not succeed. "Charlotte," he said quietly. "Lottie, my love, come here." The child did not. She tucked her face deeper into Eleanor's collar. The Duke did not insist. He looked at Eleanor instead, and Eleanor saw, in the brief, unguarded second before he gathered himself, a man who had been waiting for years, every day, for someone in his household to be reached by this child, and who had also been waiting, every day, for the moment when reaching her would be done by anyone but him. "Miss Carrow," he said, "you are wet. The hall, please. We will speak in the library when you have changed." He turned and walked back the way he had come, not waiting to see her follow, not summoning a footman to direct her, not glancing once over his shoulder. Eleanor exhaled slowly. The child lifted her head, took stock of the back of the Duke as he disappeared between the hedges, and made a small, satisfied sound that was almost a hum. "Mama," Lottie said again, conversationally into Eleanor's ear. "Lottie," Eleanor said. "Sweetheart, I have a different name." "Mama," said Lottie. There was nothing to argue with. Eleanor began to walk toward the great front of Hartfell Hall, which loomed out of the spring drizzle in honeyed stone, with windows full of new green light from the budded chestnuts. And she did not put the child down, because the child had not yet given her permission. The housekeeper was called Mrs. Bowes, and she was not, Eleanor saw at once, an unkind woman. She was a tall, marrow woman with a ledger habit and a pinched look around the eyes that came from running a great house with one master, one tiny ward, and no lady at the head of the table for 3 years. She had clearly been mortified that the new companion had arrived to find the ward bolting under the wheels of her own carriage. "I will not pretend to you, Miss Carrow," Mrs. Bowes said, leading her up the great staircase, "that we have had an easy time of it. There have been 4 companions before you. None of them stayed 3 months. The last walked out on a Tuesday." "What happened on the Tuesday?" Eleanor asked. "Lottie hid her bonnet," Mrs. Bowes said, "in the duck pond." Eleanor laughed before she could stop herself. It was the kind of laugh that surprised her. A real laugh from her chest, with the full warmth of recognition in it. She had laughed like that as a girl. She had not laughed like that, not entirely, since she had stood at an altar in St. George's 2 years ago, with 300 people watching, and the bridegroom not arriving. Mrs. Bowes glanced sideways at her, her own mouth softening. "Most companions," Mrs. Bowes said dryly, "do not laugh." "Then most companions do not realize," Eleanor said, "that hiding a bonnet in a duck pond is a perfectly fair declaration of war." Mrs. Bowes looked at her for a moment longer than strict propriety required. Then she opened a door at the top of the east stair. "Your room, Miss Carrow. Hot water in a quarter of an hour. The Duke will receive you in the library at 5. She turned to go. At the threshold, she paused. "Lottie has not let anyone hold her since her mother went away," she said quietly. 3 years. Eleanor's hand closed slowly on the doorframe. The wood was warm under her palm. The room had been aired and a fire lit, even though it was spring. Someone in this house had decided in advance to be kind to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Bowes," she said. "There is a wooden hare on the bed," the housekeeper added, almost as an afterthought. "Lottie sent it up to you. It is her hare. I would advise you to give it back at supper." The door closed. Eleanor stood in the center of a room she did not yet know the corners of. On the white quilt, propped against the pillow, was a small carved hare of pale apple wood. Its ears had been smoothed shiny with handling. Its left forepaw had been mended once, neatly, by someone who knew how to mend. She picked it up. It was warm. She sat down very suddenly on the edge of the bed, because her knees were no longer arguing, and she pressed the small wooden hare against her own collarbone and laughed once, brokenly, and then steadied herself. "Eleanor Marlowe," she said aloud, to remind herself who she was. "Eleanor Carrow," she corrected, also aloud, more steadily. "Eleanor Carrow, companion, country post, quiet, unnoticed." The hare did not argue. The hare was on her side. The library at Hartfell was a long room, with 3 tall windows giving onto a stretch of new lawn, a fire that had clearly been built up in the last quarter hour, and a duke who was standing, not sitting, with his back to the hearth and his hands clasped behind him, in the formal posture of a man who has chosen distance for both their sakes. He had changed. His coat was a dark green now, almost black in the firelight. His shoulders, somehow, had not got any narrower indoors. "Miss Carrow," he said. "Your Grace." She came in to the second window, no further. The carpet was a deep, soft blue that gave under her foot. The hare, returned at the door to a delighted Lottie, was now no doubt being marched along the nursery windowsill in a procession of 1. "You have read the terms of your engagement?" the Duke said. "I have." You will be paid quarterly. The rest of your conditions stand. You will have an afternoon a week to yourself. You will dine with my niece and Mrs. Bowes when I am from home, and with myself and my niece when I am here. You may receive correspondence. You may not receive callers without my knowledge. Yes, Your Grace. He paused. The fire popped. He did not look at her exactly. He looked at a point a foot above her left shoulder, which was the look of a man who had decided that direct eye contact would not help either of them in the next minute. Lottie, he said, has not used that word before. Eleanor folded her hands in front of her. She had practiced, on the journey from London, the small, respectful sentences a companion was meant to deliver in a duke's library. She had practiced composure. She had practiced the exact tilt of the chin. She had not practiced this. I am sorry, Your Grace, she said. I did not invite it. I know you did not. The Duke turned his head slightly. He looked at the fire instead of at the point above her shoulder, which was almost the same thing as looking at her, only kinder. I do not require an apology, Miss Carrow. I require an understanding. Yes, Your Grace. My niece's mother, my sister, went before her time. Lottie was a year old. She has been here with me since. She is loved. She is safe. She is... He paused, searching for the right word, and Eleanor could hear, in the small space of that pause, a man who chose his words because he had learned what happened when one did not. She is wanted. I see that, Eleanor said. I saw it on the gravel. He looked at her then, properly. His eyes were the colour of weather over a coast, grey with the suggestion of green where the light caught. They held hers steadily, without challenge, the way a man holds a horse's bridle when he is not sure whether the horse will bolt. She has not been mammaed, he said. Not by her nurse, not by Mrs. Bowes, not by any companion. By no one. Until you stepped out of a carriage. It was not, I know it was not. I am not accusing you, Miss Carrow. I am informing you. He exhaled. It was not quite a sigh. It was the small permission a man gives himself when he has been carrying a posture for too long. My condition, he said, is that you do not encourage it. You are her companion, not her mother. We do not put words on her tongue she will have to give back. Eleanor felt the shape of the sentence settle over her like a hand placed deliberately on a shoulder. It was not unkind. It was the work of a man who loved a child enough to be careful with her language. I shall not encourage it, Your Grace, she said. I shall not discourage it either. To do so in front of her would be cruel. We will let it pass, as a child's first impression. You will become Miss Carrow to her over the next weeks, by simple, gentle correction. I understand. Good. He turned his face fully back to her. The relief that had been in him on the gravel was gone. In its place was a careful, formal warmth that Eleanor recognized because she had worn its female version every day for 24 months. You laughed, he said suddenly. She blinked. In the carriage drive, with Mrs. Bowes. I heard you from the steward's window. The previous companions did not laugh, Miss Carrow. I have not heard a laugh of that kind in this house since my sister went. He said it without sentiment, like a man stating a barometer reading. It is a thing my niece deserves to hear. I'm glad you brought it. That is all. Thank you, Your Grace. Supper at 7. Lottie eats at 5:30. Mrs. Bowes will direct you. She turned to go. At the door he said, without raising his voice, Miss Carrow. She paused. Welcome to Hartfell. It was almost nothing. It was the smallest possible courtesy. And yet Eleanor, who had been welcomed into many houses and turned out of 2, heard in it a man who did not waste words. Thank you, she said again, and went out. In the corridor she leaned against the wood panelling for 1 second and pressed her palm flat against it, as though steadying herself against a moving deck. Then she straightened her cuffs, lifted her chin, and went to find the child who had decided what to call her. 3 days passed. Eleanor learned the shape of Hearthside the way one learns a horse's temper, slowly, with attention to small signs. The east wing had a draft the housemaids had given up on. The walled garden was tended by a man named Burridge, who had 3 opinions and no questions. The kitchens ran by a clock. The Duke rose at 6, rode for an hour, returned, breakfasted alone, dealt with the steward, walked the home farm, dealt with letters, walked the home farm again, and dined at 7. He saw his niece for half an hour after breakfast, half an hour at 4, and a quarter of an hour at her bedtime. He loved her. Eleanor was certain of it within 48 hours. He loved her with the fierce, careful, hands-off love of a man who had been told, somewhere along the way, that his hands were too rough for breakable things, and had decided to believe it. Lottie was 4 years old. She had her uncle's grey-green eyes and a mouth like her grandmother's miniature in the long gallery, and she preferred to be carried sideways because, she said, that way she could see both sides of the corridor at once. She had a vocabulary surprising for her age, and a habit of sudden, complete silences when she was thinking. Her wooden hair went everywhere. The hair's name was Mr. Glove. Eleanor had been afraid to ask why. By the end of the 3rd day, Eleanor had been told by Lottie that her freckles were like a constellation, that hyacinths smelled purple, that the second best place to hide was under the dining table, and that Mr. Glove preferred his tea with cream. Eleanor had not been corrected from Mama. She had, gently and consistently, been correcting. "It is Miss Caro, my love," she said, retying a sash. "Mama," said Lottie, watching the bow with critical interest. "Miss Caro. Mama Caro. That is a compromise, sweetheart. I think we will not pursue it." "Mama Caro," said Lottie firmly, "is what I have decided." She slid off the chair and pattered off to find her hair. The Duke, who was passing the open nursery door with a sheaf of land agent letters in his hand, did not break stride, but he heard. Eleanor saw the small twitch at the corner of his mouth that was the closest thing to a smile she had seen on him. It is a strange thing, she thought, to be reduced to the language of someone 4 years old, and to find it the most accurate language anyone has used about you in years. On the 4th morning, she found him in the greenhouse. She had not expected him there. She had taken Lottie down to the kitchen yard hens, a daily ritual since the 2nd day, and the child had wanted afterwards to see the lemon trees. Eleanor, who had grown up with no greenhouses and no lemon trees, was helpless to refuse. The Duke was at the far end, in his shirt sleeves, pruning a fig. He had hung his coat on a nail. The shirt was white, the cuffs turned back, and the morning sun through the glass put a slant of gold on the long, working line of his arm. His shoulders moved with the small repeated work of the shears. He had not heard them come in. Eleanor caught Lottie's hand instinctively, not to hold her back, but to mark the moment. To give the child the first second of her uncle she had not been required to share with the rest of the household. Lottie did not call out. She watched her uncle's back the way she had watched Eleanor's face on the gravel, with the strange inward gravity of small girls who already know which adults belong to them. The Duke turned. His face changed. Not formally, not the careful warmth of the library, but completely, the way a candle changes when it catches. "You found me," he said. "We followed the lemons," Eleanor said. "That is the most reliable navigation in this house." He set the shears down on the bench, picked up a cloth, wiped his hands. Lottie pulled free of Eleanor's grip and ran to him. He went down on one knee on the brick floor without thinking, caught her, lifted her halfway up so that she was at the height of his shoulder, and made a small, exaggerated noise of effort that pleased her enormously. "You are heavier today, Miss Lottie." "Mr. Glove ate 3 breakfasts." "Then Mr. Glove is a glutton. I shall write him a sermon." "He will eat the sermon." "That is the danger, yes." He set her down on the bench beside the shears, where she could not reach them, and turned to Eleanor. He had a smudge of green sap on the edge of his thumb. He had not bothered to put his coat back on. "Miss Carrow." "Your Grace?" "You have been 3 days in my house. You have not yet given notice." "I have not." "That is unprecedented." "I am informed," she said gravely, "that my predecessor lasted to the duck pond incident." "My niece has many resources. We have not yet seen all of them." "I shall be on my guard against bonnets." "Wise." There was a small silence. The greenhouse smelled of warm earth and citrus leaf, and, very faintly, of the lavender soap he must have used after his ride. The bees in the open vent were being efficient about a tray of seedlings. Somewhere, deeper in the rows, a watering can dripped. Eleanor became aware, abruptly, that she was looking at his bare forearms. She lifted her eyes. He was looking at her. Not pointedly, just looking. The steady, inventorying look of a man who was not in a hurry to draw a conclusion. "You are very young," he said, "for a woman who has had so many posts." "I am 27, Your Grace." "That is what your letters say, yes." She felt the faint pressure of the question that was not asked. She heard, in his courtesy, that he had read her references and noticed gaps a man with less attention would not have noticed. She prepared 3 different answers, abandoned all 3, and chose the truth. "I had a different life before," she said. "It did not continue. I have had country posts since." "I see." He did not press. He picked up Lottie's hand, turned it palm up, blew gently on a tiny fingernail, and put it down again, as if he had merely been confirming that it was still attached. "Lottie," he said, "go and tell Burridge that I shall want a word with him about the south frame." "Mr. Glove will go," Lottie said. "Mr. Glove will go. Take him." Lottie went. The bricks rang under her small slippers. The greenhouse door swung shut behind her with the soft puff of warm air sealing in. The Duke straightened. "I do not pry, Miss Carrow." "I noticed, Your Grace." "I observe. There is a difference." "There is." He picked up the shears again. He did not return to the fig. He stood with the closed shears in his hand and looked at Eleanor across the bench, as if measuring something he could not yet name. "My niece needs," he said, "what she has decided you are. Whatever you wish to be called, she will hear what she hears. I am asking you to stay long enough that her hearing is correct." "Long enough is?" "Until she is 12 at the earliest." Eleanor laughed, short, startled, helpless. "Your Grace, I came on a 1-month trial." "I am aware." "I cannot promise 8 years." "I am not asking for 8 years, Miss Carrow. I am asking for your presence until further notice, with salary commensurate, with privacy commensurate, with what protections I am able to extend." She stared at him. The shears in his hand were perfectly still. "You are asking me," she said slowly, "to stay until further notice, for the sake of a 4-year-old's vocabulary." "I am asking you to stay until further notice, for the sake of a 4-year-old. There it was, the plain sentence underneath the formal one. Eleanor did not answer immediately. She could not. She had walked into Hartfell 3 days ago, expecting to disappear into a household, and found, instead, that a duke and his ward had between them a need shaped exactly like the woman she had been before her name was broken. "I shall consider it," she said, and her voice was steadier than her hands. "Good." He bent his head, not quite a bow, more a small concession of acknowledgement, and turned back to the fig. She left the greenhouse with sap on the edge of her own glove, from where she had braced against the bench, and Mr. Glove's procession down the brick path ahead of her, and the absolutely clear awareness that the next time the Duke came too close to her in a room, she would not be able to remember the right number of inches. The post arrived on the 7th day. Mrs. Bowes brought a single letter to Eleanor at the breakfast table. Eleanor saw the seal, claret-coloured wax, an unfamiliar crest, and felt the specific cold water sensation she had not felt since the morning after Hanover Square. The hand on the direction was not familiar, but the seal was. She put the letter on the table beside her cup. Lottie was eating buttered eggs with the diligence of a small accountant. The Duke was at the far end of the table, reading his own correspondence. He did not look up. He had, Eleanor was learning, a remarkable courtesy about other people's letters. "Miss Carrow," Mrs. Bowes said quietly at her shoulder. "Shall I—" "No, thank you, Mrs. Bowes. I will read it after breakfast." She did not read it after breakfast. She read it in her room with the door closed, sitting at the dressing table with the spring sunlight on the unopened seal, and her hands quite cold. When she broke it, the hand inside was different from the direction. The hand inside, she knew. "Eleanor, I have been informed, by a source which does not signify, that you have settled at Hartfell. I cannot tell you how grieved I have been to learn it. The Duke of Hartfell is, as you may not be aware, a personal friend of mine. I shall be a guest at his country dinner on the 12th. Reflect, dear Eleanor, on what this circumstance must mean. I cannot in good conscience permit a gentleman of his standing to be deceived. I beg you, as a friend, to spare us both the necessity of a public unpleasantness. Withdraw quietly from the post before the 12th. I shall consider the matter forgotten. Yours in regret, T." Eleanor read it once. She read it again. She stood up. She walked from her dressing table to the window and back twice. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed and laughed. Not the carriage drive laugh. The other one. The thin one she had used in the months after St. George's. The one she had thought was retired. T. The single initial. As though they were still in the easy, lettered proximity of an engaged couple. As though there had not been 300 witnesses. Lord Tarrant. He had not changed. "I shall not withdraw," Eleanor said aloud, to the applewood hair which Lottie had insisted on lending her overnight for moral support. "I shall not." The hair was on her side. She folded the letter into the smallest possible square and put it into the back of the writing desk drawer, behind a packet of old pen nibs. Then she went down to the schoolroom, where Lottie was waiting to be taught the difference between a cat and a kitten in penmanship, and she did not let her hands shake on the slate. The 12th was 5 days away. She told no one. She told herself that it was professional discretion. The Duke had hired Miss Carrow. He had been gracious. He had asked for nothing he had not been entitled to ask for. To bring a private matter to him in his own house would be to exploit a kindness she had only just been offered. She told herself that Tarrant was a coward, but he would not, in fact, attempt anything in front of his host. That he wrote menacing letters and rarely produced. That his courage had always been epistolary. She told herself, finally and most persuasively, that she could manage it. She had managed worse. She had managed the silence at the altar, the carriages reversing on Hanover Square, the look on her father's face. She could manage one dinner. On the morning of the 12th, she dressed Lottie in a pale green muslin with a sprig pattern, tied a ribbon for the 3rd time, and went down to her own room to put on the dress she had been keeping for an emergency that, until this week, she had not believed would arrive. It was a deep ruby silk. It was 3 years old. It had been altered at her own hand, after she had stopped being a person who wore deep ruby silk. It still fitted. It had always been the most expensive thing she owned, and she had kept it not out of vanity, but out of the cold, practical sense that a woman in service may, once a decade, need to look like a lady whose name has not been broken. Mrs. Bowes saw it on the upper landing as Eleanor came down to take Lottie to the Duke for the afternoon visit. Mrs. Bowes did not comment. Mrs. Bowes did, however, draw a breath through her nose and say, dryly, There will be 10 at table tonight, Miss Carrow. The Duke desired me to inform you that you will sit at his left. At his left? Yes. Mrs. Bowes, surely the Dowager Lady Veringer. His Grace has placed the Dowager Lady Veringer at his right. He has placed Miss Carrow at his left. Mrs. Bowes paused. The pause was so long, Eleanor suspected for a moment that the housekeeper was inserting an entire silent commentary into the gap. I am not in the habit, Miss Carrow, she said finally, of questioning His Grace's seating. No, Mrs. Bowes. I do, however, feel obliged to mention that I have been at Hartfell 11 years, and His Grace has never seated his niece's companion at his left. I see. I have, Mrs. Bowes said, almost to herself. No further observation. Eleanor, who had been on her way to deliver Lottie, had to stop on the half landing and steady herself with one hand on the banister. Her palms were no longer cold. Her palms were doing the opposite of cold. The hair in Lottie's hand wobbled gravely. Lottie, my love. Mamma Carrow, said Lottie. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Glove says you are a comet. Does he? He is sure of it. I shall ask him about it later. She put the child into her uncle's care for half an hour, did not meet his eyes, did not trust herself to meet his eyes, and went back upstairs to put on her grandmother's pearls. The dinner at Hartfell. 10 guests, and the Dowager Lady Veringer at the Duke's right, and Eleanor at his left, and the long polished table reflecting candlelight onto a vaulted ceiling that had been painted, in Eleanor's grandmother's lifetime, by a Frenchman with opinions about cherubs. Lord Tarrant was 3 places down on the same side as Eleanor. He did not look at her when she came in. He smiled, charmingly, at the wife of a neighbouring baronet, drank his wine, and did not look. Eleanor recognized the strategy. He was waiting. He had grown a beard. It did not improve him. The Duke, beside her, was attentive in the precise, formal way of a host. He spoke equally to Lady Veringer on his right and to Eleanor on his left. He asked her, without elaboration, whether the soup was sufficiently hot and whether the orchids in the centrepiece had been in the greenhouse that morning. He did not single her out. He did not need to. The seating spoke. The first course passed. The second course passed. The conversation, like all such conversations, was an inventory of cousins and of horses. It was over the lamb that Tarrant spoke. Hartfell, he said, in a voice pitched exactly a little louder than necessary. I had not realized your niece's companion was such a striking woman. One does not expect a country governess in ruby silk. The Dowager Lady Veringer, who had been buttering a roll, paused. The Duke set down his fork. Lord Tarrant, he said, Miss Carrow sits where I place her. She wears what she chooses. The garments and the seating are not, properly, dinner conversation. My dear Hartfell, I meant only a compliment. I doubt that very much. The table, which had been a table, became a room. Eleanor felt the shift the way one felt a barometer drop. A wineglass between her fingers was very steady. Her face, she hoped, was very still. It is only, Tarrant said, with a small, graceful tilt of the head. But I find myself certain I have met Miss Carrow before. In London, some years ago. The face is so very distinctive. And the colouring. I do not believe you have, Eleanor said clearly. Surely. Hanover Square. A function, I think it was. I do not recall. How curious. I recall it perfectly. That, the Duke said, in a tone Eleanor had not heard from him before, is enough. The table was now, beyond any doubt, watching. The Duke did not raise his voice. He set down his glass. He turned his head 1/4 turn toward Tarrant, and his grey-green eyes were the colour of a sea before weather. Lord Tarrant, you will recall, perhaps, that I extended this invitation to you as a friend of my late cousin's husband, which is the thinnest connection at this table. You are a guest in my house. You are seated with my dependents. The young woman on my left is in my employment and under my protection. A second remark of that nature will compel me to ask you to retire from the table. A third will compel me to ask you to retire from Hartfell. I trust I am clear." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was complete. Tarrant smiled. The smile was a thin, pale thing. "Forgive me, Hartfell. I had not understood that the subject was sensitive." "There is no subject," the Duke said. "There is only a meal." "Lady Veringer, the lamb is excellent, is it not?" "Quite excellent, Hartfell," Lady Veringer said, dry as paper. "Quite the best mutton I have had in years." It was lamb, not mutton. The whole table understood the loyalty of the deliberate mistake. Two of the gentlemen laughed. The neighbouring baronet's wife, with the social instinct of a woman who had survived 12 London seasons, asked the Duke a long, dull, useful question about drainage on his home farm. The conversation closed over Tarrant the way a pond closes over a thrown stone. Eleanor did not dare look at the Duke. Eleanor did not dare look at her plate. Eleanor, who had been silent through 20 months of every kind of hint and innuendo, looked instead at Tarrant. She met his eyes across 3 places of polished mahogany. She did not flinch. She did not soften. She made her face into the exact composed mask she had worn in the carriage on Hanover Square. Only this time, it was not a mask. This time, it was her face. He looked away first. It was a small thing. It was the smallest possible thing. But Eleanor felt, for the first time in 2 years, that some absolutely specific bone in her chest had unlocked. She thought she had got through it. She had got through the lamb and the cheese, and the moment when the ladies withdrew and Lady Veringer took Eleanor's elbow in the drawing-room doorway and said, in an undertone, "My dear," with a depth of meaning that would have required a paragraph from a younger woman. She had got through the half-hour of the drawing-room, where the baronet's wife sat down beside her and asked her, with intelligent kindness, about Lottie, and listened to the answers as though Lottie were a perfectly normal and acceptable subject to listen to a companion about. She had begun, very cautiously, to think she had got through it. Then Tarrant came into the corridor. The gentleman had risen from the dining room, and Eleanor, wanting 1 minute to herself before the music began, had stepped out toward the schoolroom stair to check that Lottie was settled. She had not heard him follow. He caught her elbow at the foot of the stair. "Eleanor?" She did not turn her head. "Take your hand off my sleeve, Lord Tarrant. You will hear me. 2 minutes, that is all I ask. You have just had your minutes. They were spent at dinner. Eleanor, I wrote to you in good faith. I gave you a chance to leave quietly. Why have you done this? Why have you made me? You made yourself." She turned then. The corridor was warm with candlelight from sconces, and cold from a draught somewhere down by the boot-room door. He had let go of her sleeve. He had not stepped back. "I am no longer a person you write to," she said, and her voice was so low and so controlled that she did not recognize it. "I am no longer Eleanor. I am no longer the woman who waited in the carriage on Hanover Square. I am Miss Carrow. I am a companion. You do not know me. You are still, I am not still anything that concerns you. Hartfell will turn you out within the hour when I tell him you're real. I am here." The voice came from the dining-room door. The Duke had not raised it. He had not needed to. He stood in the corridor with the firelight from the still open dining room behind him, and the long line of his shoulders blocked the corridor, as the whole stable yard had been blocked the morning Eleanor arrived. He looked at Tarrant. He did not look at Eleanor. "Lord Tarrant," he said, "my carriage will be at the front door in 10 minutes. Your man will pack your trunk in the carriage. You will not return to Hartfell. You will not write to anyone in this house. You will, if you have any care for what little remains of your reputation, never speak Miss Carrow's name in my hearing or out of it again. Do I make myself plain? Heartfell. Plain. Tarrant's mouth opened. It closed. He looked at Eleanor as if to make a final attempt, and found her looking back at him with absolute, peaceful contempt. He bowed, a small, ironic bow, since he had no grace left for any other kind, and walked not toward the door, but stiffly back toward his lodging in the east wing, to gather what he had brought. The Duke did not move from the dining room doorway. When Tarrant's footsteps were gone, the Duke looked down the corridor at Eleanor. He looked tired. He looked, Eleanor saw with a small, clear shock, like a man who had been holding a thing in for 2 hours. "Miss Carrow," he said, "if you can manage it. My study. Now." She managed it. The study was smaller than the library. The fire was newer. The desk between them was a plain mahogany piece without ornament, and the Duke stood behind it with his hands flat on the wood and his head down for a long moment before he lifted it. "Tell me," he said. Eleanor told him. She told him about Hanover Square, and the 300 guests, and the carriage that had not arrived, and the letter she had received 4 days later, in which Tarrant had explained, with elegance, that his uncle had refused his consent, and that he could not in conscience proceed, and the rumour, immediately following, that Eleanor had been seen with someone else, which was a lie, and had ruined her, which had been the point of the lie. She told him about her father's face. She told him about her mother's grief. She told him how she had taken her grandmother's name and disappeared into country posts. She told him because she had, in 24 hours, not been asked once whether to tell. She did not cry. She had finished crying about Tarrant a year ago in a different county. The Duke listened. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he sat down, not because he was tired, but because the news of a story like that ought not to be received standing. "Your real name?" "Eleanor Marlowe." "Eleanor." Yes." "Your father?" "Sir John Marlowe of Eston Hill in Suffolk. He is alive. He does not write." "I see." He stayed silent for a long minute. The fire ticked. A clock on the chimney-piece, a small, restrained clock with a gilt face, went on with its small, restrained business. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than Eleanor had heard it. "Eleanor." "Yes?" "You have been 24 hours away from a roof over your head every day for 2 years. Did you understand that when you took this post?" "I understood it." "That is why you came." "That is why I came." "And then a child put a word on you you did not expect to hear again." "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was something in his face that Eleanor recognized because she had seen it on the gravel. The small, complete look of a man who had been waiting every day for several years for a particular thing to happen, and was now confronting the fact that it had. "You will continue tomorrow," he said, "exactly as you have been. You will not retreat from the schoolroom. You will not retreat from the breakfast room. You will not, on any account, retreat from the greenhouse. You will continue, Miss Carrow, to be Miss Carrow until further notice. Do I make myself plain?" "You make yourself perfectly plain, Your Grace." "And then we shall—" He stopped. "Yes?" she said. "And then, when Notty is asleep and the household is quiet, we shall sit by the fire in this room, and you will tell me what you wish your life to be. Not what you have been able to manage. What you wish." "Not tonight, Eleanor. Tomorrow." She was crying, not because of Tarrant, who could not reach her anymore, but because of the precise tone in which a man she had known for 10 days had said her real name. She did not lift a handkerchief to her face. She pressed her palm flat against her own cheek instead, an old habit, the closest thing she had to a self-soothing motion. The Duke did not look away. He did not move toward her. He let her have her own cheek for the small, private use of a moment. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. "Henry, I cannot. Tomorrow you will. Tonight you may go up." She went. At the door she paused. "Your Grace." "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me finish my own sentence." He looked at her. There was something that might have been a smile in the corner of his mouth. It did not arrive, but it considered. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night." She closed the study door behind her. In the corridor, she stood for a count of 12 with her forehead against the cool wood. Then she went up the east stair, past the schoolroom, into Lottie's nursery, where Mrs. Bowes had left a small candle burning, and she sat on the edge of the child's bed for a long time and watched the small, steady rise and fall of a child's sleep. Lottie, without waking, reached one warm hand out across the coverlet and found Eleanor's hand. "Mama?" she said in her sleep, conversationally. "Yes, sweetheart," Eleanor said. "Yes." In the morning the household behaved as though nothing had occurred. Tarrant's name was not mentioned. The Dowager Lady Veringer departed at 10, having sent up a private note asking Eleanor to come and see her in town if she ever found herself in want of an introduction, which was the closest Lady Veringer ever came in her life to the word friendship. The neighbouring baronet's wife sent flowers. 2 of the gentlemen sent cards. The Duke did not refer, at breakfast, to the previous night. He did, however, when Eleanor came in, rise from his seat, a courtesy he had not previously extended, and which he extended now without ostentation, and remained standing until she was seated. He said, "Miss Carrow, the toast is excellent this morning." He said, "Lottie, Mr. Glove is permitted on the table. I have been informed." Lottie, who had not been informed, beamed. After breakfast he went to deal with the steward. Eleanor took Lottie to the kitchen yard hens. The day, having begun in a manner of cool civic ceremony, turned ordinary by 10 o'clock. A small ordinariness which was in itself an act of kindness. By 11, Eleanor was teaching the difference between a long-tailed tit and a chaffinch, which Lottie regarded as material of grave importance. It was at 3:30, when she had set Lottie to a slate in the schoolroom and stepped out into the corridor for 2 minutes of her own, that the Duke found her. He was carrying his coat over his arm. He had been outdoors. There was a single fragment of straw caught in his cuff. Eleanor noticed it because she was not, at that moment, allowing herself to look directly at his face. "Eleanor?" "Your Grace." "Henry." "Henry." She said it very quietly. He smiled. A real smile this time, not the consideration of one. And the corridor, which was not a small corridor, became suddenly insufficient. "Walk with me." I have spoken with Mrs. Bowes. She will sit with Lottie at the slate for a quarter of an hour. The Hare will supervise. Walk with me." He took her down the back stairs and out through the kitchen garden door and along the south wall of the walled garden to the greenhouse. The same greenhouse where a small girl had once said, "We followed the lemons," and they did not speak until they were inside. He set the coat down on the bench. He turned. He did not come to her. He stayed 3 paces away, which Eleanor was grateful for, because 3 paces was the difference between coherence and incoherence. "You are not alone in this house," he said. You have not been since the morning you arrived. You did not know it. I did not perhaps know it either. I did not entirely know what I was doing when I sent the agency the description I did." "Your Grace." "Henry. Henry. I asked them for a woman who could match my niece. I did not anticipate the rest." "What rest?" He looked at her. The morning light through the glass had warmed to afternoon, and the shadow of a fig leaf moved on the brick floor between them. The rest, Eleanor, is what I would like, with your permission, to call you something other than Miss Carrow. Not yet. In time. With your patient consent. With the small, steady demonstration on my part that I am someone who can be patient. With Lottie, who is already chosen for both of us in the meantime, providing a daily reminder of what she would like the household to call you also. She did not speak. I am not asking now, he said. I am giving you an honest map of what comes next. I am asking only that you stay, that you continue, that you let me be in the room with you, often, without ceremony. Henry. Yes. Lottie called me Mama before she had been told my name. Yes. You are asking me to stay in a house where the 4-year-old has already named me. I am. Henry. Yes. The 4-year-old, she said, has more sense than either of us. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, a real laugh, from the chest, rusty at the edges from disuse. It was not a long laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had not, in fact, been waiting for years to be told the joke. It was the laugh of a man who had just been told, by the woman he was learning to want, that his ward was ahead of them both. I shall stay, she said, until further notice. Until further notice. And I shall be Miss Carrow for as long as you need me to be Miss Carrow. And then I shall be... We shall see. I have conditions, Henry. Tell them. I do not become Mamma because I am asked. I do not become any name because I am asked. I have been asked a name once before in my life, and I lost it. The next name I shall take because I have chosen it. That is fair. And I shall not be asked to forgive Tarrant. I shall not pretend, on any future occasion, that I have. You shall not. And Lottie shall not be told the parts she does not need. She shall not. Then yes. He came forward then. 3 paces was not, as it turned out, a defended distance. He stopped close enough that she felt the heat of him before he touched her. He did not embrace her. He took her right hand instead, the one with the small green sap stain on the cuff from the morning's lemon expedition, and held it loosely between both of his. Eleanor, he said. Yes. I am going to learn to be the man you take a name for. You are part way there. I am aware. He bent his head, not to kiss her, not yet. The not yet was its own promise, and pressed his forehead to hers for the count of 3. The greenhouse smelled of warm earth and citrus leaf, and his lavender soap, and her grandmother's pearls. And somewhere outside in the kitchen yard, a hen was complaining elaborately about something, and somewhere upstairs, a 4-year-old was drawing a very serious portrait of a hare on a slate. He let go of her hand. He picked up his coat. He smiled, once, and walked her back to the schoolroom door. Until further notice, he said. Until further notice, she said. She went in. Lottie looked up.
Mama Carrow?
Yes, my love. Mr. Glove says the Duke is smiling. Does he? Mr. Glove is sure of it. Eleanor sat down beside the slate and was, for a long moment, unable to speak. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon at the very top of the summer, Eleanor stood on the south lawn of Hartwell Hall in a pale green muslin with sprigged white flowers, and the Duke stood beside her, in a coat the colour of indigo gone almost black where the shadow of the chestnut crossed it, and Lottie, between them, holding a hand of each, held also, against her shoulder, a wooden hare with a mended forepaw. The vows had been brief. They had been said in the small chapel 1/2 mile down the Chestnut Avenue, with 20 guests, none of them Tarrant, none of them anyone Eleanor would ever again be required to please. Her father had not come. He had, however, written. The letter was in the back of a writing desk drawer she would, on some future evening, when the afternoon was quiet enough, decide whether to keep. The chestnut avenue threw long bars of green light across the lawn. "Mama," Lottie said. "Yes, sweetheart." "Mama," Lottie said again, deliberately, looking up at the Duke. He went down on one knee on the grass. He did not glance at Eleanor first to ask whether he should. "Yes, Lottie." "You are smiling. Mr. Glove was right." "Mr. Glove is frequently right." "Mama," she said one more time, experimentally, and then, with the small, definite smile of a 4-year-old who had been waiting a long time for the rest of the world to catch up. "Wife." The Duke lifted his head. He looked at Eleanor. He did not laugh, although the corner of his mouth moved. "Wife," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said, and her voice was steady, and she did not press her palm to her own cheek, because there was, at last, no longer any need. He stood. He took her hand. The small wooden hair watched gravely from Lottie's shoulder. The afternoon was full of green light, and the kitchen garden smell of warm earth, and a faint, clean note of something growing. Hyacinth, perhaps, or a child who had been crawling in a flower bed an hour ago. "Walk with me," he said. She walked with him. If you have ever stood somewhere you did not belong, with a name you no longer answered to, and felt a small, warm hand find yours in the dark, this story was for you. Tell me in the comments what you thought of Lottie, and of Mr. Glove, and of the moment Tarrant looked away first. Subscribe if you would like another fireside story. Pull your chair closer. There will be more.